Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a follow-up to our webinar that we did called Piloting Microsoft Copilot AI. We had so many great questions that we just weren't able to get to. So we wanted to do another follow-up email to get all those questions answered to make sure that everyone got the most information they could out of the webinar. So with that, I have Jared and Tavon with me, and we're going to jump right into the questions. For the first one, we got, what are the privacy features of Copilot? Using the plugin seems great, but how is sensitive information protected?
All right. So I think that's, a great question. A lot of people, when they hear about Copilot and it being able to look at your organization's data, that raises some red flags for people. When it comes to the kind of first party stuff, Microsoft's own implementation of Copilot and just talking to Copilot that way, they have a lot of great information out there about how they approach protecting your data. They want to make it very clear that your information isn't used to train the AI. It's not reported back to Microsoft, anything like that. So there are some good links that we can get out to you about some of the Microsoft approach to your own security. For the plugins, though, that's one of those places where you do have to be somewhat careful. So if we're grabbing a plugin from some third-party service, right, whoever built that plugin has a lot of control over how the program actually uses your data. So definitely review very carefully any plugins that you actually enable. And from an admin point of view, it's worth pointing out that you don't have to allow everyone in the organization to have access to plugins. If you wanted to just let a certain subset of people have access to your plugins to try them out, you can absolutely change that in your admin center before you turn them on for anyone else.
And I would just add in there a couple of things. One, Tavon, as you were speaking about that, I went and pulled up the Microsoft AI Responsible AI Principles and Approach. This is Microsoft being very transparent with you on their approach to responsible AI and what you can expect and what they're promising you. So we love to be able to share information with you and kind of give you guidance on certain things, but we also want you guys to be able to go read it for yourself. And so if you have an AI council, they should be reading this. If you're thinking about an AI council, this is one of the things that should be, first meeting, everybody go read this and understand these things. So that those questions are really answered in your head as far as, what does Microsoft think is permissible and what do they not think is permissible? What do they think is good and what do they think is bad and so forth? So this is a good place to go. And then I would also say, permissions, so security is probably the number one thing on my list when I'm talking to a client about, do you have Copilot readiness? Are you ready to implement or turn on Copilot in your environment? And again, I think we might have mentioned this also inside of the webinar, but if you can't answer the question, what is in your environment, who has access to those things in your environment, then you're not ready to turn on Copilot AI. You may want to address that first before you then go back and turn it on. So once you can answer those questions, you're on the right path.
And one more little thing there that, while you were talking, I just wanted to make sure to emphasize this as well, is Copilot itself does a great job of being security conscious, right? Respecting your permissions and whatnot. But plugins, they won't always have that same level of respect for permissions. For instance, if you, as an organization, go out and build your own plugin to talk to something like Monday or some other task service where not all of your users can actually go out and interact with that service, it's really worth keeping in mind, how did we build that connection to that other app? Is it going to be running in the context of a super user, no matter who's talking to Copilot? If so, we want to be a little bit more careful there when we build out these extensions.
Good question. All right, or good answer.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so then on the topic of security still, someone asked, seeing as Copilot is fairly new, are there any scams or phishing attempts we should be aware of before using it?
So that is an amazing question. I haven't heard of anything like that. And mainly because what you want to do as an admin is make sure you're having Copilot work in the context that you want it to work in. So there are some settings and things like that where you could allow Copilot to interact with the internet as it's going through and doing things. So should that be turned on for your environment? Should that be turned off for your environment? So ensuring that you've done the legwork in the background to make sure that you're appropriately locked down, I guess, is a good thing along that journey. But no, I haven't heard of any. Um, Especially on your intranet, I haven't heard of anything like a scam or things that are equivalent to like email based attacks.
And while not, a scam or an attack, I think it's also worth really considering training for your users when it comes to some of the problems that can come up with AI itself, right? Like hallucinations or false answers and the tool just kind of making things up at times. That's not necessarily a malicious attack, but it is something to really be aware of that could cause you to have a worse experience with Copilot or other AI if you aren't aware of it and don't know what to do to kind of confirm that you're not getting false information.
Yeah, and I think that question just leads back again to making sure that you've done everything possible for your Copilot readiness effort or data governance effort in your environment. If you've done those types of things, then you're on the right track for opening up Copilot to your organization. If you are questioning yourself on those, then you need to slow down and stop, and let's get those questions answered first before we actually go in and turn it on. So, it are my permissions again, making it impossible for someone who shouldn't see a certain set of data, to not be able to see that certain set of data. Do you have that correct in your environment? And I think we've all experienced, a phone call that says, "Hey, I think someone may have, had access to the specific document. Looks like everyone has access to it. How did that happen?" So if those who are IT professionals, you probably had those types of things happen. And so certainly if that's sitting out there in no man's land or everyone man's land, then the Copilot's going to be able to see it as well. So I think most of it is internally making sure that you have addressed your Copilot readiness and making sure those things are done. It's going to be less about at this point about you know uh, uh, attacks like spam and things like that. It's weird.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay, so the next one then is asking, what are the limits for Copilot? I know ChatGPT has a limit on the amount of prompts. So does Copilot have a similar limit?
Right. Excellent question there. So, Copilot, we haven't found anything that restricts how often we can use it or, gives us any sort of a hard limitation saying you've done enough prompting for today, go somewhere else or anything like that. A couple of limits that do exist, though, are things like the character limit for an individual prompt. So you can see that down at the bottom of the screen here, 0 out of 2,000 characters used in this particular prompt. Now, if we send a message to Copilot, you might notice that there's kind of a little green bubble in the bottom of that message that says something like 1 out of 30 or 7 out of 30, depending on how far you've got into that particular chat with Copilot. What that's talking about is that just so Copilot can kind of better understand the context for your conversation, within one of these chat threads, it's allowed to look at those last 30 messages. Again, that's within this same thread, though. I don't know that we can go beyond 30, right? Once we hit that 30, it kind of tells you, hey, you should start a new chat and try again. But, I can't really say if they have any plans to increase that limit or change it in the future. But that's really what I would want you to be aware of.
So, but I would also say, think of this as first iteration kind of, and more to come, right? So certainly if you've watched the news, you've seen other uh, AIs or AI innovation where someone has increased the amount of data you can put into a prompt to something like 2 gig or something like that. It's something crazy. I don't know what the actual number is, but something crazy, right? And so, I mean, would we expect that from all of the other platforms as well? Possibly. I imagine they're in competition with each other, trying to outdo each other and things like that. So maybe as they go along, you'll see increases in things like the 2,000 character limit that you see down here, or 1 of 30 responses that you see here. and maybe there's no need ever to have a new chat. You could just have a continuous chat, like you would have with a regular human being or something like that. I don't know. So we'll see what happens. We'll monitor it, and if we hear something, we'll let you know.
Awesome. So then our next one is essentially we are hearing that Copilot is not integrated between Microsoft apps and acts differently in each and behave differently in each other. Can one set of prompts in one app be used in the other apps and then refined specifically to that app? That way, your work products are integrated on the same topic and coherent. Thoughts?
So with that, right, I think it's worth going back to kind of that initial thing that we mentioned in the webinar, where is it one Copilot? Is it 17 Copilots? It's not really super clear, but I'd want you to think about it as different Copilots. They're all kind of talking to the same AI engine under the hood, but all those different apps have their own implementations of Copilot. So if I'm really used to talking to Copilot in a way that works super well for Word, maybe Excel would approach answering some of those prompts differently. That being said, though, right, there certainly is going to be some commonality with the functionality of Copilot, no matter where you access it from. For instance, having it summarize a document, it'll do great if it's Word, it'll do great if it's PowerPoint, if it's Excel, whatever.
So
Awesome.
so
Oh, go
just
ahead,
kind of
Jerry.
to add to that, right? Remember Copilot Lab, and as you're trying to get better at prompting and even a strategy for sharing prompts across the organization, all these things are possible. You just need to kind of, start with, again, how do we think about this holistically as either a team or as a company? What is going to be our strategy for this, and getting a little bit of guidance behind how you guys want to be able to handle it. And then being able to, but use like Copilot Lab as kind of something to help you build that strategy, but also something to help just kind of give you an idea of what's possible inside of there, and utilize that to your advantage.
And since we have Copilot Lab here on the screen, let me just point out one little detail that I find kind of especially helpful about Copilot Lab is if you look at the bottom left of any of these prompts that it suggests, it'll actually tell you, hey, here's the app that this works really well in. Like this one on the right here works super well in PowerPoint.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Then the next one is when I open up any of my Microsoft documents, I do not see Copilot. Is there a feature that needs to be turned on?
So, yes, Copilot is something that has to be turned on, but beyond just being turned on, it also has to be purchased. So, Copilot does come at a kind of extra licensing cost for whatever users we're trying to enable Copilot for. At the moment, that's, I believe, $30 per user per month, and specifically per user we're giving Copilot to. Once you've kind of purchased that license and assign it to the user, right, it might take a couple of hours or a little bit of time for it to kick through the system, but then you'll start to see Copilot show up for you in those different Microsoft apps.
Awesome.
Perfect. For the next question, then, someone asked, are Teams announcements the same as Viva?
So Tavon, you want to explain that? I think they're referring to the demo that you did inside of Teams where you created a new announcement.
Sure, sure. So Viva and Teams are, they're kind of their own bespoke services, but they both have this announcements functionality built in. In Teams specifically, what you'll find is it just makes this post look a little bit different. It has the little banner that we can use. Whereas from Viva, there's a couple extra pieces of functionality that come with announcements you might not see if you just wrote that announcement from Teams with this little post type triggered down here. So same kind of concept, but Viva's might be a little bit more built out.
Yeah. So two different products for sure. This is just kind of, as we go along, we're enhancing Teams to do more things. If you're in a channel and you want to be able to make something stand out a little bit more than just putting a normal post inside of there, putting a nice headline in there, or even putting a picture with it and all that kind of stuff is really kind of cool to be able to draw attention to it. And some of you do use Teams and you have like this open channel that you use for your organization. It's a nice way to be able to use that as news post if you want to. Most of you probably use SharePoint for that. But it's just an enhancement to Teams, then it's just called announcements. It's not really tying into any of the other functionality.
Perfect. Now, someone else asked, can you ask Copilot to stick to a template for an organization? I think this was referring to when we're kind of talking about PowerPoint and how it would pick a design and such.
Yep. So great question. This question was actually asked a lot at the conference. So I think anytime someone was giving a demo of the PowerPoint version of this, they were asked the same question, like, how do I get it to use my template? Because I don't care about the template it lays out. I want to use my corporate template. So Microsoft put this post inside of here, use your organization's branding with Copilot in PowerPoint. If you just did a search on that, you would be able to find exactly this article. And this article will walk you through what are the requirements of your template. There's even, I want to say that this might be one of the actual, from the actual conference or what they used in the conference to demo this, but if not, it doesn't really matter. But it is there's a video here for that. It talks about what needs to be available, the minimum requirements for your template, like what does it need to have inside of it as options. And then it just talks more about how it will do it as well. So there's an article in here for that. For how that happens, and feel free to go look that up, and then you'll have your answer.
Awesome. Someone else asked, can admin turn on one Copilot at a time? Say only for Teams to start, then email, etc.
So for that, I would say we haven't really found a good way for you to say, oh, I want Word Copilot to be enabled, but not PowerPoint Copilot. There are some controls that we do have, right? For instance, in Teams, we as admins get to decide, should Copilot be in all of our meetings? Should Copilot only be in meetings that are recorded and transcribed? Should Copilot be allowed in meetings at all? But for your just general use apps, I haven't found a good way to say no Copilot for one, but Copilot for another.
Yeah, and we would show you the Copilot Teams admin, but for some reason it's broke right now. You can't even get into it. So it is what it is. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, keep that in mind. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't. If you turn off like Copilot in meetings, it doesn't necessarily mean that you still can't inspect things that were produced by Microsoft Teams, or actually go into the SharePoint sites and or have it look at documents that live in a SharePoint site with Copilot. So it's not, again, Copilot, different aspects of it, different reaches for each of them. So you kind of want to just be aware of that. So I can control some things as far as an admin, but not all things as far as an admin.
And I think that's part of where having a really good rollout plan for Copilot starts to become your friend, right? Because we can't say, hey, I don't want it in these 3 apps that would confuse people. Maybe we want to have something like a pilot program for which of our users are going to kind of start getting Copilot first. They can get some good experience, help you build up a good training plan for the rest of your users before we turn it on for everyone.
Yep. So in this whole Copilot piece of the admin center, so this is for admins, not for everyday users, right? Really kind of helps with that. So it helps you monitor your adoption. If you go read about what some of this is supposed to do for you, helps you with some of your adoption efforts. You can see like where are we actually using it at and where are we not using it at. You can look at the licenses in here and help manage the licenses from here, just takes you to the other place. It also gives you message centers just for Copilot, so you can see what's coming out, what's being changed, what things are you need to know as an administrator. Then some resources down here, and this is where I found earlier the Microsoft's commitment to AI responsibility. So there's some good articles down here as well. But then over in the settings, it's worth noting that here I have the Copilot Bing Edge and Windows Copilots that I'm monitoring as well. And then it gives you some information about this and how to make sure that this is available or not available. The Copilot for Teams, like I said, that would take us over to Teams, but unfortunately ours is, for some reason, we can't get in there right now. And then here, improve responses with web content in Copilot for Microsoft 365, which to anyone would probably raise a lot of red flags. Like, what do you mean? Is it going to take my information outside to the web and so forth? So be sure that you're reading some of this stuff. Go through, read it for your organization, and determine whether this is something that should be enabled or not. Allow Copilot to improve responses with web content. Ooh, I don't know, right? That's that that maybe that's not something that you want enabled. Not sure. And then how plugins work and such as well, or are plugins allowed? So all of these settings are the ones you currently have right now. Take a look at those if you're an admin, and go through each one of them and read kind of what each one of these does as well.
Awesome. Okay, this next one, we reworded it just a little bit. So now is the experience with Copilot different if I use Microsoft Office on my desktop and not in the cloud version?
So that's a good question. Um, it's a really good question. So, for example, because the question would imply, like, is it exactly the same Copilot sitting on my desktop version that was built into the web version, or should I be working out of the desktop all the time, or should I be working out of the web all the time to get the best Copilot experience? So it's a great question, right? So here is a OneNote notebook that I have, and I have not found yet where I would go in here and do a little co-piloting, right? And so I don't see anything up here on my icons. There's no button for Copilot, none of that. So I don't know if the web version team of this hasn't got around to it yet or not, but here's my desktop version of it. This is the exact same thing that I have open, the new SharePoint role definitions. And inside of here, you'll see the Giganto, Copilot button, which will again open up that same experience we talked about before of giving you Copilot on the side. What you've also seen me show you, or seen us show you along the way, is what you get out of each one of these might be different, things that are leading you to do work inside of here and trying to help you out. But it is the same experience, if you will, by, I have the prompts down at the bottom and so forth. So, but then over here, as I say, even right click on things, I would see like summarize, to do, and rewrite, a limited amount of things to be able to do. And maybe that's why they haven't, when I right click here, added that in here yet, because maybe they're trying to get more, figure out how it's going to work better. Not 100% sure. So the experience, I'm going to just say, would be different in both of them, but those experiences, the difference in those experiences will probably vary based upon the actual tool.
Great. So then this next one asks, what would be the best way to use Copilot to search through your departmental files to provide a list of all content related to, say, paleoclimatology?
All right. So for that, I think if we're trying to use Copilot to kind of do that search and give us that roundup of information, just use Copilot Chat for now and try to be very specific. The reason I say for now is because Copilot for SharePoint is coming out soon. We don't know exactly what that's going to function like for things like searching for files. But over in your Copilot Chat, if you tell it, hey, here's the SharePoint site I want you to look at, it'll do its best to kind of narrow down the search that it's doing behind the scenes to find that information. But a lot of times, what you'll find is if we're talking to it about files, it might even include in that response, "Hey, I would recommend you actually go to SharePoint and do a more detailed search to find all of your files."
And then I think my part of that answer will be a little bit weirder than Tavon's part of the answer, which would be, remember what we've tried to talk about as we go through this about prompting, right? So the way I would take that scenario and dress it down is I would first say, give me all the files that meet this criteria, right? Go get those. And keeping in mind that I could have done that from search, right? So I could go to search and tell it to go find all the files that have this specific criteria in there. But Copilot may give me a slightly better experience here because I can continue to communicate with that prompt. So I can say, okay, now that you've given me back that list of files, what I'd like you to do now is see the ones that meet this criteria, or if I'm telling it to go look at a bunch of items that I have done over the last month or something like that, now fill in this extra piece, like give me a description of each one of those, that kind of thing. And then when I get through that piece of it, then saying, okay, review everything that you've given me so far, clean up that answer a little bit for me and then present it back to me as a grid, something like that. I may break down that conversation that I'm having with it to be able to get to specifically what I'm looking for. So I hope that makes sense.
Beautiful. Okay, and then our last question. What would be the best way to use Copilot to search through emails and my Outlook calendar to provide a list of all training sessions I attended with a description of the training content and time spent in the training?
Yeah, so I think I'd give the same answer here is the weirdest thing about that is just ask Copilot, right? That's what I'd say. Just ask it what you want, and then continue to have that conversation with it. So keep in mind that the prompting piece of this is what's going to get you through, not just having Copilot, right? I think there are more valuable things out there than Copilot, like automation. Like automation actually saves me time in my week from having to do the job at all. Copilot just helps me read a bunch of text and summarize it really quickly and then help me get to an answer that I'm looking for. So there's a difference in what those two things are doing, right? And and yes, you can join those two things together. I should mention that as well. You can have automation that has Copilot inside of it. But what I'd say is, I would ask it first, that first part of the question, hey, go review my week. Tell me what training sessions I've been into. And then the second answer there or second question I'd ask it is, okay, can you now add a description to each one of those for me? And tell it, don't improvise. Don't improvise when making up the descriptions, right? You can tell it that, and I've seen where people have great success with that, giving more accurate information back. Because again, it's a text thing. It's trying to help you write something. It thinks you're trying to create some descriptions that are meaningful, that would be kind of embellished a little bit, but tell it, do not improvise, do not embellish on this, and then get back a more accurate answer. Then once you get all that back, say, hey, I'd like you to display it this way for me. So continue to use that 1 of 30 as you're going through that conversation, right? Continue to use that to refine what it's giving you and get back a much better answer.
And I think that approach is really worth highlighting just for a second to mention, how you were kind of building on what Copilot already gave you. One of the most important things to note with Copilot or any other AI tool in the world is that it might get something wrong. It might have missed something. It might have made something up. So rather than having just one giant prompt that does everything and assuming it's right, it might be better to break that into smaller prompts so you can more easily check Copilot's work along the way.
Awesome. Taylon,
Awesome. Okay.
can you
Oh,
give
go
us a
ahead.
can you give us a demo of that, Taylon? Or I can actually drive, but let's do a demo of that using Bing Copilot, right?
Sure.
So I'm going to go out here to just the greatest browser in the world, Bing. I know some of you cringed because you're like Google fans. So sorry, everyone. I was just joking. Okay. But anyway, I went here to Bing and I see the Copilot icon here. Right. And so it's going to bring up Copilot here. Am I logged in? Who am I logged in as? Let me log in as something different. There we go. So now I'm logged in as work, right? And so at the top here, you'll see work and you'll see web, right? And so when I'm in work, it's focusing on things that are inside of my environment, and very, very much this is the same as doing it from the other Copilot prompt inside of your environment. So you see they look the same. They're basically the same, if you will. But here I'm going to go, and you can see that I've been talking to it for a while. Oh, look at that. I'm going to go in here and just ask it a question, but I want to use the web version of this real quick. And so for some of you, I'm going to do some developer code, but I think it brings up the point and really illustrates it really well. So I'm going to say, please create
Uh,
PowerShell code for adding an item to a SharePoint list. Okay. And so it's going to go out here and it's going to come back and give me some code. Like this is the code that I should write, right? And so I look at it and I say, okay, it even explains along the way, like, hey, there's some things you should do for it. And I look at it though, and I say, okay, this is great, but I really want it to be able to get the information to insert from a CSV file. Okay, so change this to accept data from a CSV file. The file will have two columns, first name and last name. Okay. And let's just go see, I'm just communicating with it, just having a conversation, right? So it says, okay, based upon that, let me go ahead and modify the code a little bit. And if we looked at this, and Tavon, would you say this code is correct?
I would say that it's mostly correct. Yeah, I might have used a different PowerShell module, but other than that, I like it.
Yeah, so it's doing the job, right? But I also noticed that it doesn't have any error handling in it. And so I might say to it, hey, and so an inexperienced person looking at this may say, this is the perfect code. Got it, let me go, right? And they start doing stuff. But a more experienced person who knows how to write the code already, and that's the important thing. I already know how to create the resume. I already know how to create the code. I already know how to create the PowerPoint presentation and what I wanted to say. I already know how to do these things. I'm not going to take Copilot's word for it. I know what it should look like in its finished state. It's just doing it a lot faster for me, right? And sometimes it even gives me ideas that I may not have thought of, and that's good. So inside of here, I note that it doesn't have any error handling, and I prefer to have error handling. And I could say, looks good, because you know what? You should always be nice to the AI just in case, right? And then I'm going to say, please add error handling. Okay. And then we'll go see what it'll do. So there it has now a try catch in it. Now I know that you guys don't write code. So a lot of you, you're not a developer. That's not important in this example. What's important is that it was doing what I knew should be done. And I was telling it along the way. Because at the beginning of this, I could have put all that in one prompt and said, hey, make sure you use error handling in here. And it would have given it to me correctly, right? But what I wanted to be able to do is not look at a lot of code right off the bat. I don't want to look at a complete resume right off the bat. I don't want to look at a complete PowerPoint presentation right off the bat. I want it to give me the smaller amount of data so I can check it along the way, then ask it for more improvements. And then as it gives me, I can verify those improvements along the way. And also note that it's not changing the core of what I asked for in the process. So again, I get that this was a coding example, so thank you guys for watching that. And so for some of the people who are looking for coding examples, ta-da, right? But for everyone else, thank you for letting me use that example as we go through this to kind of make a point.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, guys. Okay, well, that is the end of our questions. Thank you so much again, everyone who was able to join. Anyone who wasn't, we still appreciate you checking out the webinar. Hopefully these questions were helpful to everyone who asked, and we'll see you all at the next webinar. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.